Um, and we can hear her. Hi, do maybe you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Great,
Can you?
awesome. I can hear you too now. So I was
Perfect.
asking about King Charles. How's he doing? Did you say hello to him for me?
I haven't yet, but I will.
Okay.
I'll try my best.
All right. And then the geopolitics, and President Trump is not very happy that a lot of countries, including the UK, are not supporting him, sending their military arms to protect the Straits of Hormuz and all of that. What are you hearing around you?
So what I'm hearing regarding that is number one, there is a strong protection of individual country interest right now across the West. So typically we would have seen a unified stance on choices like this. And a very good example is what we saw in 2022 with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, there's a very, very stark contrast with what is happening right now. Between US, Israel, and Iran, and how countries are perceiving this war and the implications of that on their economy. I think the bigger threat to this right now is the implications on global trade and how sharply energy costs have significantly increased. So, despite the fact that we are entering into the summer season and typically heating demand would likely decline, however, because of climate change issues and the fact strongly persisted across the West and European markets. We're seeing that very strong protection of individual country interest, and to some extent, a new change in alliances happening. So I will say we're entering a very different global economic world and global economic era. Like we're hearing right now, it's almost a new world order that's happening, and we'll continue to watch to see how all of it unfolds. But there are very strong implications for what this means for the next 5 years for the world and even for frontier markets.
Obviously, obviously, I know I believe after COVID, we thought we could catch our breath a bit, but President Trump thought otherwise, and so he came first with the tariffs, and now this war, and we're having to realign our relationships as countries and all of that. But maybe if you could help us to understand what's going on. So if you see the price of Brent this morning is about 101. Um, I think yesterday it went to about 106. And then
Yes.
WTI was supposed to be about 98, you know the difference. But today we see WTI is above 100, while Brent has steadied at about 101. Do we know what's causing this? It seems WTI is more volatile at this time.
Yeah, so I would say that so there are three things. The first is, of course, the bearish market sentiments around the change in, President Trump's stance regarding how quickly he wants to, go as far and beyond in his military attacks against Iran. One of the things that is really a major driver to this is number one, the shift in the president's decision as to how quickly he wants to, take over to change the military dynamics in Iran. So, for instance, he gave a stance of, I think, last week Friday, and now that deadline has shifted again. So the markets are pricing this in as to what exactly President Trump has in mind to do, considering that right now talks of a potential deal or an agreement to keep the Strait of Hormuz open for ship vessels to pass through is not exactly on the table with Iran. The second bit of it is the bearish sentiments around other supposed alliances and how that is quickly changing with the UK, Germany, France, and other G20 countries not exactly coming to the table. And now President Trump has said they should fend for themselves in how quickly they can get their oil out. So the markets are definitely pricing this in. And President Trump also made a statement around the fact that these countries have two choices. Either they get their oil from the Strait of Hormuz by speaking with Iran, or they ideally buy from the US. So the question now is, that the US have enough oil to service all of these markets? And will these countries actually decide to buy from the US, knowing how fragile decisions can be with President Trump? So on that note, we're seeing all of these qualitative and policy pronouncements and confidence and sentiment levels really, really driving the price of crude oil, especially WTI. There's also the fact that there's data that has been released on the fact that the US the US crude oil inventories as well. We've seen a drawdown on that. And of course, what that means for the ability of the US to sustain its own crude oil demand and demand for petroleum refined resources. Now, a flip side to all of this is what exactly is happening in the Middle East as well, where the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE and how all of them, are either backing Iran or not, and what this means for pretty much global trade in the next couple of weeks and months. So there's a lot of sentiment that is driving crude oil prices. A statement today could either send prices up or send prices down. So a lot of volatility going on in the markets
Yeah,
today.
obviously. And maybe, I don't know, is this why we saw PMI numbers yesterday? So while we are still on the positive trajectory above 50, we did see an easing both from Stanbic, NESG, and the CBN.
Yes, you're very right in that. I think there's always that transmission effect between how these macro events affect the government and then of course affect businesses in Nigeria. And there's a lot more nuance with how that eventually plays out. So when you look at it on the surface level with higher oil prices above $100 per barrel and what that means for fiscal revenues, it looks good, right? Especially with the fact that crude oil production has somewhat steadied at around 1.5 million barrels per day, exceptionally meeting, OPEC's quota. That looks good. But when you flip it and you look at the implication of what this means for petroleum for petrol prices, and then you look at the other impact on LNG prices and how this affects cooking gas prices, you summarize all of that together and you see that energy costs are significantly higher, over 60% higher. And this means that operational expenses are also higher. We've also seen the Naira somewhat move, in accordance with these changes that we have seen globally. And this also is impacting, transaction costs for businesses. And when you break it down further, you look at the fact that businesses in Nigeria are primarily within the informal sector, right? So it means that they are highly exposed to these changes in operational costs. And of course, when you further break it down, you see an increase in operational costs, increase in logistics costs, increase in administrative expenses. All of this boils down to a slowdown. All of this boils down to a slowdown in economic activity and business operations. And if this happens more, we would continually see output levels shrink. And that's exactly what these PMI numbers are currently pointing to. And if the war continues, we would likely see it go down even further.
Wow, that'll be sad. We do hope. Well, we don't know because President Trump says one thing one day and the next day he says another. I mean, he did say that, oh, it looks like the war is coming to an end, and now he said there's going to be intensifying of the war in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then Iranians are coming to tell us that there's no peace talks or anything like that. It does seem that the other parts of the world they are messy, but we'll see how that goes. Do maybe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.